Good morning. Salamat Sabado. Maligayang Sabado. See, I'm mixing up Indonesian, mixing up Tagalog. I don't even know who I am. Look, this is Filipino Heritage Day, right? Filipino Heritage Day. And you know, I was honored to join the choir to sing. So, look, I am Filipino, but I will tell you, I'm also an imposter because I only understood one word, Jesus. Okay? But thank you for accepting me. Thank you so much for accepting me. And thank you for every person, participant who has worked hard to make this day special. Just a reminder, right after the service, I know you're hungry, don't go eat first. To earn your meal, you got to take a picture. So we're going to go in the front here, we're going to take a picture, and then we're going to zoom right back and enjoy a wonderful Filipino feast. I hope you're hungry. I hope you're hungry. Look, you might feel, I don't have a barang or a Filipiniana. I don't have that. And that's okay. Today we're highlighting and remembering Filipino culture. But sometime this fall, we will plan an international day. Okay, so just stay tuned. We want to appreciate this culture, but we also want a time where we can celebrate all cultures. So that's coming. Stay tuned. It'll happen this fall. If there is one thing that Filipino culture is known for, it is food. We love good food. In fact, Catherine and I got a text from some friends in Colorado, and they said that their new pastor, or their pastor, Pastor Rodley, had come a few years ago, and Pastor Glenn was here as a guest speaker, and he'll never forget coming to this congregation and eating delicious food in the fellowship hall. And that's what she told us in the text message this week. There's something that the Filipino culture is known for, it is food. We love to eat. And if you agree, say amen. All right, you go to a Filipino party, you cannot leave. You cannot leave without taking food with you at home. Most of the time, it's not just little leftovers, it's an entire meal that will last you the next day. Okay? So we love to eat. And here's another picture that I think about when I think of the Filipino culture. Just a few weeks ago, I came late. I usually greet people right after church. No, not yet. Not yet. Oh, you guys know what that is? Not yet. Man, I'm just giving it away here, okay? Do you know what that is? All right, it's a type of a star apple, okay? So what happened was, let's go back to the previous slide, please. Okay, we'll go back to that. So before I show that picture or explain that picture to you, can I give you a sneak peek? I was eating here for potluck, and you know, as was mentioned in the prayer, the biggest problem in this community of faith is that we need space. And so the place was tight. I came late with my food. I had no place to eat. There were the umbaos there and the lows there and a bunch of students. I had no place to eat. My wife was there. And I had my tray, and I thought to myself, is this going to be like, you know, school, first day of school, where I don't know where I'm going to eat and sit by myself? Lo and behold, the group said, hey, Pastor Nestor, have a seat. Come have a seat and sit with us. And so we crammed together in that table, all of us around that table, and it felt good to be welcomed to the table. If you come to a Filipino gathering, be prepared to eat. And we don't mind that if it feels tight, but we want to make sure that everyone gets a plate of food. And not only do I appreciate the food from the culture of my parents, I appreciate the hospitality. There was a word that Pastor Rodney used. It is bayanihan. Those of you from the Philippines understand that word. What does the word bayanihan mean? It refers to the spirit of communal unity, work, and cooperation, often used to describe a tradition of neighbors helping each other. That's the picture. That is the essence of the Filipino culture. I've seen it. I grew up in it. It is the essence of hospitality. We are a people who welcome all people to the table. Doesn't matter your race, your religion, socioeconomic status, gender. Every person has a place at the table. And this morning, I believe God is going to affirm our hospitality, and He's also going to encourage us to extend our hospitality. Let me frame it this way. be more of who you already are. Let's be more of who we already are. And that's really the message of today's teaching. It means to be all things to all people. So let's go to 1 Corinthians. It's a book in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. If you don't know where that book is, just go to the table of contents. It's in the New Testament, kind of in the middle toward the end. It's a letter written by Paul to a church, a group of churches in Corinth, 2,000 years ago. And if you don't have a Bible, there's one in the pew in front of you. If you don't have that, the passage is in your bulletin. If you don't have that, go on your smartphone or your tablet. I want to encourage you to see the text and read it with your own eyes. So 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and we are going to start with verse 19. Okay, I'm in the New International Version. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting with verse 19, Paul writes to the church. He writes this: "Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many people as possible." And then he says in verse 20, "To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews." You see, when Paul wrote this letter, he wrote it to believers in a diverse city. In the diverse city of Corinth, all of the believers came from a variety of backgrounds. And they each brought their own cultural and religious roots into the church, kind of like what we see today. Yes, many of us have traditional Filipino clothing and garb, but we have a mixed multitude here. And this is what the early church was experiencing there in Corinth. So Paul, as a Jew, he deeply appreciates his heritage, but he also recognizes that his ultimate freedom is found in Jesus. And from Paul's example, we learn that it is possible to embrace our Christian identity, which is primary, while we can also appreciate our roots. He said to the Jews in verse 2 or verse 20, "I became like a Jew to win the Jews." He appreciated his heritage. And like Paul, we too can appreciate our heritage. This past March and April, I had the privilege to travel to the Philippines after not being there for 16 years. I had not been there since 2009. A lot happened since 2009. I finished grad school, I got married, had children. So it was very heartwarming. And going to the Philippines after a 16-year break, the country of my parents' origin, did something to my soul. It did something to me. Now, we primarily went there for a mission trip. And I had never been to the southern part of the Philippines, in the island of Bacolod, and we shared the gospel. We did a mission trip there, and I know Edmund is here, and he played a pivotal role he went there 5-6 weeks in advance to prepare the ground to build a prayer garden, and it was a beautiful experience. Bacolod is also known as the city of smiles, and it's true. I felt the hospitality and the smiles from the culture. After the trip, I then flew north to Luzon, and you can see it on the map here. That kind of like that blue part on the top. I flew to Luzon to see my family, and over there, I flew into Clark Airport. So the main airport is Manila, but about 2 hours north of there is this airport called Clark. It was my first time to fly there. Clark Airport was really a U.S. base when the U.S. was there, especially during the war. And so I flew there so that it would be closer to my family. I drove 3 hours north. My uncle didn't have AC, so I felt the heat during lunchtime driving up north. And I landed in Dagupan, and I saw the Soriano side, my dad's side of the family, the paternal side of my family. And then the next day, after staying there, I drove down to this place called Artacho in the province of Pangasinan. And there, I went to my grandma's old house, or my grandma's house. She is deceased. And then I hung out with the decano, or the maternal side, my mom's side of the family, and it was amazing. And before I left my mom's side, we'll put that picture up on the screen, I had this amazing fruit, okay? This amazing fruit that right now is my favorite fruit. I can still taste it in my mouth. It was delicious. And I had not had that since going back in 2009. In fact, I don't even know if I had it in 2009 because I was eating all of the mangoes. Going back home, right, to my parents' home, this is probably my 5th or 6th time going back. It gave me a greater appreciation for my roots and their fruits. This trip reminded me that I am part of a larger story, and today, many of us remember our Filipino heritage and story. You see, the Philippines is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands in Southeast Asia, shaped by centuries of indigenous Asian Spanish influences. On June 12, 1898, the Philippines declared its independence from Spain 126 years ago, marking a historic step toward becoming its own nation. The reason why we're celebrating this day is because on this coming Thursday will mark 127 years since the Filipino culture, the Philippines has been independent from Spain. And not long after that, the country then came under American rule, which left lasting influences on its education, government, and culture. And pretty much from 1900 to about 1950, America then came in and left a lasting influence. And it was because of that lasting influence that many of us here who have emigrated from the Philippines are here, because of the education and the connections. It was because of those connections that my mom, who finished nursing there in Manila, decided to apply and to take a test, passed the test, and she had the chance to come to the United States to work as a nurse. And many of you are part of that story. Now, why did she choose Chicago instead of California or Florida? I don't know. Cold Chicago, but I'm so thankful that she chose this place, and I'm so thankful to be a Chicagoan. And today, Filipino identity remains a rich blend of native tradition, Spanish heritage, American influence, marked by deep faith, strong family ties, and I already mentioned the word, warm hospitality. We can appreciate our roots and we can honor our heritage. I love our food. I love our halo-halo. I love our barongs. I love our Filipiñanas. That's what the ladies are wearing. A member in our church, a friend, Ceci Ruiz, she said, "Do you like my 10 Commandments outfit?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? You see the tablets right on the sleeves for some of the ladies?" I was laughing so loud in the foyer here. I was like, I had never heard that before. Some of you all, don't be embarrassed. That's actually a compliment. It's pretty cool. Okay, that's from Ceci. I love our tinikling dances. I love the pancit, and I love our karaoke machines. Man, when I went to see my Soriano side in Dagupan, they said, here, Alan, that's my middle name. Here's a mic, sing karaoke. I tried my best. Okay, you're going to see a karaoke machine in Filipino homes. In fact, I was even swimming in Cebu before going on the mission trip. Swimming, okay? And I'm hearing karaoke. Okay? People singing from their homes while I'm swimming. I'm like, everyone's doing karaoke here. That's what it means to be Filipino. Food, music, hospitality, and karaoke. You see, Paul appreciates his heritage, but it does not limit where God calls him to go. And while Paul values his heritage, his true identity and purpose are actually rooted in Christ. And that's why he says in verse 19, "Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible." Paul is saying, listen up, believers, my true identity is in Jesus, so I can honor my heritage on one hand, but also step into where other people are. You see, Paul says that he makes himself, or he chooses to be a slave. It's another word for saying he chooses to be a servant. So on one hand, Paul appreciates his Jewish culture because he grew up a Jew. But on the other hand, he will do whatever it takes to adapt and to assimilate to new cultures to reach as many people as possible. Can you say the word adapt with me? Okay. It's also known as assimilation. It's what many of us did. Those of you who came from another country, or your parents came from another country, you have emigrated to this country, and you're like, I don't get. I have to adapt to the new environment. Okay, this is what Paul did. What is the fuel that is driving Paul's mission to make as many followers of Jesus as possible? What is causing him? What is the fuel that is driving Paul's car to adapt and to assimilate to all of the cultures around him? Well, he says in verse 23, He says, I do all this for the sake of the gospel, the G word, that I may share in its blessing. The gospel compels Paul to welcome as many people as possible to God's table. It is the gospel that is the fuel that is driving his missionary engine to take the good news to the world. Paul cannot eat at God's table alone. Nope, he can't eat alone. He will do whatever it takes to make sure there is room for people who are different from him. He can't just stay at that table. He will extend that hospitality to bring more seats to the table. The picture that I have in mind is a picture of when I was in Bacolod, and then in Bacolod, Edmund had taken our group to an island called Lakawan. Okay, it's like Lakawan is a little resort place where you can hang out, and there's a restaurant there, and you can just hang out on the beach. It was beautiful, and we had a group of our missionaries here from Chicagoland go over there to the Philippines, and it was a mixed multitude. Let me put a picture on the screen. This is our meal. Look how long that table was. It was a mixture of Bacolod nationals, Bacolod citizens, Bacolod people, the people who came with us, and then our group from the U.S. who are also who are multi-ethnic and multicultural. We were all sitting at the table. No one was left behind. It didn't matter your ethnicity, your religion, your financial status. Every person had a seat at the table. And the gospel compels us to not only enjoy the seats of the people around us, but to bring more seats to the table. In fact, we hear God's challenge to be more of who we already are. We are already hospitable, and perhaps the gospel is compelling us to extend that hospitality to people who don't share a cultural background. Could it be? I think it's possible. You see, a table is where relationships are formed and trust is built. And sometimes that means that we leave our own table to join others. And sometimes that means that we make room at our table to welcome them in. Paul models this by stepping into the world of others and adapting. Can you say the word adapting? He adapts to their culture while inviting them into the family of faith. In both ways, the gospel actually breaks down barriers and expands the table for all to feast at God's banquet. Paul will do whatever it takes while he honors and he appreciates his culture. He will do whatever it takes to assimilate and adapt to people to bring more seats to the table. In fact, his view was the same view as John in Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. And notice what John said. After this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one can count. And does he say in verse 9, those who were only Filipino, or those who were only Mexican, those who were only Latino, or African, or Caucasian? Nope. He says, after this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, every tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes. They were not wearing barongs and Filipiñanas. And it's okay to appreciate our heritage. But they're wearing white robes, this multicultural group. Why? Because see, we can appreciate our cultural heritage, but our primary culture and identity is that we are all purchased by the blood of the Lamb. And He gives us His white robes as a symbol that He has cleaned us and that we belong to Him primarily. And so Paul will do whatever it takes to bring and adapt. He will adapt to people to bring more seats to the table, to really be who he already was, just to be more intentional about it. To actually extend the table, because it's a multicultural vision. Look how passionate Paul was. Look how passionate Paul was. Look at verse 20, 1 Corinthians. It's in your bulletin. He says in the first part of verse 20, to the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. Though Paul is ethnically Jewish, as a believer in Jesus, he is no longer bound by the law for righteousness. He's not saved by the law. So to reach fellow Jews, what he does is he honors their customs. He connects with them. He wears the garb. He uses the same language when appropriate to avoid unnecessary offense. You see what Paul is doing? Paul is bringing more seats to the table by adapting and honoring his shared heritage. And then look at the last part of verse 20. He said, to those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. These people that he's referring to are religious Jews who believe that righteousness, or in other words, right standing with God, comes from perfectly and fully observing God's laws. And Paul respects he respects their laws when he's with them. He brings more seats to the table by adapting without compromising the gospel. He stays anchored in the gospel while he's also adapting to the host group that he's trying to reach for the Messiah. And then look at verse 21. He says, to those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. What's going on here? These people are Gentiles or non-Jewish people who don't follow Jewish law, but are open to the gospel. And what does Paul do? He quotes, like in the book of Acts, he quotes poets and philosophers to build bridges. It would be like quoting modern day poets or music artists, whether it's I don't know, I mentioned Taylor Swift last week. Let's just pick on her. Taylor Swift, or quoting Tony Robbins in the productivity world and the self-help world. It's quoting these top names and these artists to connect with the foreign culture. And what he also does is he avoids imposing Jewish customs on Gentile converts. He brings more people to the table by adapting and learning their culture and speaking their language. And then he says in verse 22, it gets better. He says, to the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. He says he became weak. Who are these people? These are most likely people with fragile consciences, newer believers. And some of those newer believers could not make sense of, okay, I became a believer in Messiah, but I'm noticing that, like, some of the other believers, the Jewish believers, are eating food sacrificed to idols, and they couldn't reconcile that. Like, how could we eat this meat and this food that was sacrificed to idols? Paul would abstain from eating food that was sacrificed to idols so that he would not cause people to stumble. Paul brings more seats to the table by adapting himself and setting aside personal rights for their good. And then he says this at the end of verse 22, which is the title for today's teaching. I have become all things to all people. It's the title of today's message. So that by all means I might save some. He chooses to become all things to all people. You see, the gospel compels us to bring more seats to the table. And that means that we assimilate and we adapt to impact people for Jesus. Paul is willing to leave the comforts of his table to eat at the tables of those he's trying to reach. So let's apply this for us today. For some of us, that means stepping beyond our Filipino or ethnic comfort zone. For others, it might mean embracing unfamiliar spaces, people, books, ideas, or ways of thinking. What does it look like practically? I'm reading a book entitled Gaining by Losing by J.D. Greer, and he brought this interesting note out. I had never seen this before, or I had read it before, but he reminded me of this. He said that 39 out of the 40 miracles in the book of Acts happened and occurred outside of the church walls. In other words, the body of believers, the majority of their resources weren't spent or expended on a worship service. The believers would actually take the gospel and they would experience miracles outside in the community. Maybe God is asking us to leave our comfort zone, to leave our comfort zone and to actually embrace and engage with people outside of who we usually engage with. We impact people for Jesus by leaving our table and sitting at theirs. So I'm there in the Philippines, okay? I'm there in the Philippines, and I'm there in Artacho, Pangasinan. And there in Artacho, Pangasinan, there's also a school called Northern Luzon Adventist College. Anyone know that place? I know there are a few people here who know there. Some of you are from there. Uncle John Mark's here. In fact, when I was there, I was texting Uncle John Mark, hey, my uncles say hi, because he knows them. He hung out with my uncles, okay, on the Decano side. And so I'm over there. My uncle Lemuel, they call him Uncle Jack, didn't tell me that, I thought we were just going to go to the school, but he didn't tell me we're going to the local conference or the Northern Luzon Mission, okay, which is the local conference where all the pastors and leaders were, administrators. I came dressed up in a t-shirt and shorts with flip-flops, all right? So I went there, I met everyone, okay, and I was just honored to meet them, and they said, hey, remember you were here when you spoke 16 years ago, and it was just really good to just be there and meet the people. My uncle then takes me to one room where I meet another individual. He said, hey, I remember you, Nestor, Pastor Nestor, and let me show you a picture, okay, so we'll put this picture on the screen. This is a plaque, okay, and my Uncle Jack, my Uncle Lemuel is holding this plaque, and at the very top, notice what it says there. It says, Nazaria Kayabyab Hall. This edifice stands for the glory of God in an ardent devotion for the Kayabyab family, and then the list of my family. Who in the world was Nazaria Hesplane Kayabyab? That was my great-grandmother, 4'5" lady, but a giant of a faith, and also physically strong. Nazaria Kayabyab was my great-grandmother. And do you know why they had that plaque there? Because almost, 80, 90, even over about 100 years ago, it's amazing to think, a century ago, my great-grandmother, Nazaria Kayabyab, who became a believer in the gospel Adventist message, in the Christian Adventist message, she embraced it, and then she became a translator and treasurer and worked inside that mission. And it was because of her that she took the teaching, the Sabbath School Quarterly, as we call it, and she translated it from English into Pangasinan. And so the family and the people are remembering my great-grandmother, who practically raised me and my sister here on the north side of Chicago, on Foster and Kedzie Avenue. And all of this, like all of these memories and all of the connections are being made in my mind. My great-grandmother, our Artacho, Pangasinan, and Northern Luzon Mission, she decided to not stay with her kids in the U.S., but to actually come into my home because she knew she could make the greatest contribution. She knew that there was some brokenness, but she became really the glue that held me and my sister and my family together. Lola Nazaria impacted me for Jesus. How so? By leaving the comforts of her table in the Philippines to sit at my table on Sawyer Avenue there in Chicago. She adapted and she assimilated. And I will do whatever it takes to plant the good news seeds in my grandchildren. And the rest is history, friends. Now, how did she become a follower of Jesus? I don't know the exact story, but you know what's amazing? I'm going online and figuring out, okay, what's the story of Northern Luzon Mission? Check this out. The work of the Northern Luzon Mission, where I am in that picture, in that building, started through the pioneering labor of Roy Hay and his wife Edith. This American couple, where were they from? This American couple and their young children arrived at Port Pandan, Vigan, Ilocos Sur on a ship from Manila on November 27, 1913. The city of Vigan, being the chief commercial center of the northern provinces, was chosen to be the center for their work. And Hay met with two American missionaries who had come to the Philippines earlier, and he learned from their experience. Thus, he decided to begin the Christian Seventh-day Adventist work in northern Luzon by learning the local language of the people, translating literatures to the local language, and training local people to bear part of the work. I don't know if Pastor Hay rubbed shoulders with my great-grandmother Nazaria Kayabyab, but I'm pretty sure they knew of each other if they were translating American literature or literature from English to Pangasinan. And I don't know if how much of a role that the Hay family played in reaching my great-grandmother. My Lola Nazaria came to the faith, and I don't know if it was the Hay family that reached her, but this I know for sure. Please listen. Some disciple makers from the United States decided to leave the comfort zone of their culture to bring the gospel to a foreign land. And it's full circle because some Americans brought it to the Philippines. They impacted my great-grandmother, who then brought it to the United States. And here I am today. The way we impact people for Jesus is by leaving our table and sitting at theirs. But to leave our table and to sit with strangers, it's not easy for us to do, especially when our culture isn't used to it. I was so fascinated by this trip that I began reading a book I have already mentioned entitled In Our Image, America's Empire in the Philippines. I went to Clark Airport. I'm like, what is America's impact on the Philippines? And so I found this book written in 1990. It won a Pulitzer Prize by Stanley Karnow, a journalist. And you know what he writes here? And I highlighted this, and I'm sharing it with you. This really struck me. And he makes an accurate assessment. And those of you who are from the Philippines, let me know if this is accurate. This American journalist writes, personal rather than institutional relationships guide Filipinos, making them less sensitive to the rules of society than to the opinions of their real or ritual kin, whose esteem they must win and retain. Agree or disagree? He's saying that the Filipino culture are more prone to listen to their family network than they are to rules or rulers of society. Okay? And that's a strength because we really love our family. And then Karnow continues. Hence, their obsession with hiya. What does hiya mean? Okay? Shame. A Tagalog term that conveys the supremely important concept of face. To behave decorously toward family and friends, to display respect for an elder, kindness toward an underling, deference toward a superior. You see a superior, you bow to that superior, right? I mean, not literally, but symbolically bow. It all shows exemplary hiya and our ways to gain face. Failure to exhibit these qualities is walang hiya. All right, that's what he said. He's saying it. Failure to exhibit these qualities is walang hiya, to act shamelessly and thus lose face in the eyes of others. You know what Karnow is saying, friends? He's actually telling us, hey, look, your greatest barrier to gospel missionary work is actually your social barriers. Here's what he's saying. He's not a believer, but he's saying that Filipinos tend to listen to the voice of their family and their elders and their social network above the voice of those outside their circle. If this cultural assessment is true, then could it be possible that we are more prone to listen to the voice of people within our own culture more than voices outside of our culture? And if that is true, could it be possible that we are more prone to listen to the voice of those in our culture and our family network than we are to listen to the voice of Christ? You see, the gospel compels us to not only enjoy the seats that are already around the table, but to bring more seats to the table. Because the picture of Jesus is not only Filipinos being in heaven, it's every culture from every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. And could it be that our greatest strength of hospitality could also be our greatest barrier? Could it be that our love for family, it might surpass our love for the mission of God to bring more seats to the table? Could it be? Could it be? I'm not making an accusation, I'm just raising the question. And what will move us to appreciate our culture, but at the same time embrace other cultures? What will move us to step out of our comfort zone to bring more seats to the table? We'll read this last verse, and we're going to wrap this up. Verse 23. Notice what Paul said, and we're going to close with this verse. I do all of this. What does he mean by all of this? On one hand, I appreciate my culture. But on the other hand, I adapt and I assimilate to all the people that I'm trying to reach. Why? I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. The reason he is willing to not only hang out at his table, but to invite people who look different from him and have who look different, who smell different, who look different, who are outside of that culture. The reason why he is willing to sit at their table and invite them to God's table is because he is fueled by the gospel. And what is that? So what is the gospel? What is this gospel that we keep talking about here in this community of faith? The gospel is simply the story of Jesus, of his coming, of his death, and of his resurrection. The gospel is the story of how God loves mankind so much that he sent himself in the form of his Son. The gospel is also an experience that reminds me that I am more wicked and evil and more sinful than I ever could imagine, but at the same time, I am more loved and cared for by God more than I can ever imagine. The gospel is the story that I am not saved by what I do, but my acceptance with God is based on what God has done for me in Jesus Christ. And when I accept that, what Jesus has done for me on Calvary, then I have right acceptance with God through faith, because when Jesus looks at Nestor, he doesn't see a sinful Nestor, but he sees the perfect record and life of Jesus, the perfect love of Jesus, and that's the basis for my acceptance with God. That's the gospel. And let's imagine Jesus writing this letter to us. Let's imagine Jesus is writing this, okay? So let's say Jesus is writing this. Though I am free and belong to no one. In other words, let's say Jesus is writing this. Though I am free and I don't have to come to planet Earth, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. In other words, I am free. I can live in heaven. I don't have to come down. But because I love humanity so much, I am going to come down to earth and become a slave and a servant, because that's how much I love my people. And let's pretend that Jesus is writing this. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. Did Jesus become like a Jew? He was a Jew through and through. He became like a Jew to win the Jews. Jesus became like a human to win humans. Did Jesus become a sinner? Jesus didn't become a sinner. He was perfect in his life. He never sinned. He had perfect love in his heart. But because he loves us so much, he took upon himself the penalty of the sin that we deserve upon himself. He said, I never became a sinner, but I'm going to take your sin upon myself so that I can save you and rescue you and restore your relationship with the Father. In fact, imagine Jesus writing this in verse 22, to the weak I became weak to win the weak. Did Jesus become weak? The King of the universe, who could have just hung out in heaven, he came to earth in weak and fragile human nature. He became weak. In fact, Isaiah wrote this in Isaiah 53 verse 5. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. Was Jesus beaten and bruised for us? Yes, he was. Jesus left the comfort of his table in heaven in order to eat at our table on earth. And friends, here's my humble encouragement and my humble challenge. I believe that the reason we are not as willing to leave our comfort zone is not because we're not faithful enough or we don't have enough faith. I believe that the reason we are not willing to take risk and to leave our comfort zone, to live out God's mission, is because we have not yet fully embraced the gospel. Because what happens, like Paul, is if when you fully embrace what Jesus has done for you, you will go to the ends of the earth. You will assimilate and adapt to reach people for the Messiah. And so what's the challenge today, friends? To be more of who you already are. You're already hospitable. So extend that invitation. And you're not going to do that by focusing on yourself. We fix our eyes on Jesus, we embrace his gospel, and then we will do whatever it takes to bring more seats to the table. Our praise team is going to come up and we're going to close with this song. But I have an invitation. There might be some here who have been going through the motions of life. Maybe you're a non-believer, a believer, someone who doesn't believe in Jesus. Or maybe you consider yourself a believer in Jesus, but you have been going through the motions. And maybe you have been going through the motions of church and just have this familiar custom of going to a church building. But I want to tell you something. If our faith is only based on a surface level habit, we are missing out on the deep, satisfying, and sweet delights of the gospel and in Jesus. And there's someone here today in this sanctuary, in this building, or those watching online. You know in the depths of your heart that you have been detached from the good news. And now is that time. Now is that time to not just go through the tradition of religion, but to actually connect with Jesus himself, the very hero of the gospel. And if that's you, I praise God for the decision that you are making today. I praise God for that. Would you let us, our pastoral team, know with the connect card in the pew in front of you? There's a connect card in the pew in front of you. There's also a connect card on the screen. Maybe you want to make that, you have made the decision to follow Jesus. Perhaps you want to join one of our grow groups. We are growing in encouraging every member and every attendee to be part of a grow group, a small group, which will be launching officially this fall. But maybe you want to be part of a study group. Let us know. We want to come alongside you in your journey with Jesus. Friends, the gospel compels us to bring more seats to the table. And I feel compelled to offer you a seat. And there are some people here who want to take a seat at Jesus' table. I'm proud of you. And those of you who have been partnering with me in this gospel work, thank you. Thank you for what you are doing. We're going to do this together. Let's stand together. Let us close in our closing song. So we praise God for who he is, the King of Kings and our Lord of Lords.